Welcome in. You're listening to Medical Spa Insider, presented by the American Med Spa Association. We are happy to have you with us. This week, AmSpa founder Alex Thiersch sits down with Rob Pickell, CEO of Growth 99, to talk about the changing landscape of aesthetic medicine and how owners can stay ahead of trends. And if you want to always be in the forefront of the industry, join AmSpa at americanmedspa.org/benefits.
All right, everybody, welcome to the program. Alex Thiersch here, Medical Spa Insider. And we are very, very pleased to have live via the AmSpa virtual hotline, Rob Pickell, the CEO of Growth 99 for the last 2 years, I want to say. And Growth 99, for those of you who don't know, has been a big player in the digital marketing, entire marketing market in aesthetics for, gosh, I want to say that it's been well over 10 years. I want to say, right, Rob? Isn't that how long y'all been in the industry? Yeah, I'm telling you, in aesthetics, that's a long time. This industry has not been around for much longer than that. But Rob, you have a very extensive background. You've come in as CEO of Growth 99 in the last couple of years. Growth 99 now is a major player. I want to say you got more than 1,000 practices, and you're growing rapidly. I think is it you're only in aesthetics with med spas, derms, and plastics? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of maybe redefined the category a little bit as elective wellness, simply because, as we'll probably talk about, aesthetics is no longer a walled garden. And I think one of the most interesting aspects of it is how it's bridging into adjacencies. And so we're definitely, that's our bullseye, but we're also kind of moving our focus with what our clients are demanding in terms of their business as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, aesthetics is a relative term now. It means so much more. And your background, we were just talking before we jumped on. You've got such an impressive background with kind of new stage tech-based companies from California out west, SaaS-based companies that are in growth stage, and you've been part of these massive companies that have grown and then exited. I won't get into exactly kind of which ones and how that went, but we're talking about $100 million companies that have grown up, and you've then transitioned into the aesthetic side, and now we're in aesthetics and wellness. I'm very just curious. I'm always interested in folks who have come from other verticals, even if it's in healthcare, but just in other verticals and come into aesthetics. What's it like when you come in to an industry like this with med spas that is not necessarily, obviously we're not offering a SaaS service. We're not a technology software service industry, but obviously it's becoming such a integral part of everything that we're doing in everyday life. I'm just curious, what's your take on the industry 2 years in it, and how does it relate to other industries that you've been with in the past?
Yeah, no, great question. Just maybe a little bit of context setting. So yeah, I've spent most of my career actually in marketing, applying marketing best practices to help a variety of generally technology-centric B2B businesses grow and be successful and thrive. I spent 7 years building a health tech business that's today the largest software platform for independent medical practices, but really focused on traditional insurance-based healthcare. And so in that business, the marketing experience I had was somewhat less important, just because we were serving a group of medical entrepreneurs where marketing, quite frankly, wasn't critical to their success. Mm-hmm. And so when this opportunity came up, it was almost the perfect combination, right? Being able to bring forward a lot of deep marketing domain expertise and also health tech experience into a space that we'll probably talk a lot more about, where marketing absolutely should be on the top 2 or 3 things that a med spa entrepreneur is thinking about day in and day out, right? So a little bit about how I came kind of into the industry, where I didn't build my career within aesthetics, but I feel like there's a lot of obviously leverageable experience. But back to your question, one of the things I don't really hear discussed that much is, why is this space so interesting? I think everyone just goes to the organic, growth tailwinds that have existed for a long time now, and certainly those are changing to some degree. But what's really interesting about it, and I think ties maybe to some extent to some of the parameters of software companies, is that it's a, relatively speaking, high value recurring revenue business when a practice is managed well, right? And so, if you're able to, bring on a patient, build a relationship with them, drive outcomes that they're excited about, that relationship can last for years. And so that dynamic of having, that recurring revenue is really unique to healthcare in many ways. And I think there's a lot of lessons you can actually draw from, from technology metrics and best practices that are interesting in this space. And, certainly on how med spa entrepreneurs should be thinking about, what they're doing within the practice to create the most value.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'd love to get into to some of those lessons, because it's true. I'm trying to think, as you were answering the question, I was trying to think of other verticals in healthcare where you have that ongoing relationship, repeat patient with, between the doctor and the patient, where you're kind of coming back repeatedly over and over again and developing that relationship. And you're right, it's unique and it's rare, especially on the cash pay side, right? So it's really, it's much more of a concierge hospitality, almost retail environment than it is healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, I think I talk a lot to our clients about, the mindset and how they're thinking about, their practice and concepts like this. And I think, like, having that mindset of, you want to build a base of, closely aligned patients that you can serve well and build, multi-year relationships with them. And that's really, the backdrop to the marketing. And it really doesn't get discussed enough, quite frankly. And, again, we should come back to that and dive into that in some more detail.
Yeah. Yeah, so you all released, Growth 99 released the 2026 State of Marketing and Wellness, State of Wellness and Marketing Report, Aesthetics Marketing Report. Sorry, and I know I butchered the name there. But it's basically an industry report for marketing for aesthetics and wellness, which I love looking at these data reports whenever they come out. I kind of consume any of all of them. You can get great data for them, no matter where they come from. I really, really enjoyed looking at yours. Kudos to putting it together. There's a lot of really, really interesting data in it. A lot of it I thought was confirmation of what we had heard before, but a lot of it also, I think, is showing some interesting trends and some changes, maybe, I think that folks need to look out for. So I'm curious to get into that, and we will get into that. Before we do that, real quick though, I want to talk real briefly just about your coming on to Growth 99. You came on as CEO a couple of years ago. Obviously, there was a transition there, an acquisition. The last 2 years and moving forward, what are you looking? Kind of, what's the goal? What's your goal for Growth 99? Moving forward? Already you had a name, right? It was certainly a known entity. You've been a big player in the industry. We've known you for a while. You've been part of our boot camps. You've been doing amazing things for med spas for a long time. Coming into a company that's established already, what's your goal to get it to the next level, and how do you do that based upon your experience and where the industry is?
Yeah, no, great question. I would say when we came into the business, it was a pretty classic scenario where, the founders, just like everyone else in the industry, found the industry, developed something that was valuable to practice owners, built a really, great business around that, grew really quickly, and probably, I think it's fair to say, grew too quickly and, kind of got over their skis a little bit, relative to the company's ability to execute well. And so I would say our first year focus, not that this is ever done, was really just investing a lot in the business, so we had the right capabilities in terms of being able to consistently deliver to our clients' expectations. And I think that's not easy to actually deliver to. If you dig into what we actually do, we have a fully integrated end-to-end digital marketing platform, which really combines services and software and AI in a really unique way. And our goal, like, we came into the market, I think it's fair to say, with a strong orientation around value and being able to, find the lowest possible price point to deliver that full collection of services. And, that's both kind of the promise and the opportunity, but also the challenge for us, versus an enterprise business where, you can charge a large premium and have a lot of flexibility to invest in your capabilities. We have to, be really high quality, results oriented, but also, very focused on the cost proposition as well. And so that, that's been really probably top at my list for really the last 2 years. And to your question, though, like, what's the vision for the business, is we really want to be, the number one growth partner for our practices, where we'll talk a lot more about kind of the marketing stack and how you really combined marketing strategy with tactics. When you get into the tactical side of executing against digital marketing, that's where we want to plug in. And I think we're really well positioned to do that. We'll certainly talk more about the impact of AI. We see it super positively. We're making big investments there. We're bringing products to market. And, I would say kind of our vision is that our clients are consistently telling us that we're one of their most important partners in their success. Like, that's what we're striving for. And I think that's absolutely achievable. And again, I think it's essential that practices are really leaning into thinking about marketing and how to be successful. And that, that's where we want to be as a close partner as they do that.
That's awesome. That's good to hear. And it's obviously it's different when you have a company that's successful. The different stages of growth, I read a lot about this. It's, getting to that point when you're already there and you're trying to get to the next stage. It's a very, very different approach than trying to get from point A to point B. And I think part of that, is a good segue into your report, which talks about a lot of things. And I'd love to dive into it a little bit. One of the things that you say a lot in the report, come out right from the beginning, is that you believe, first of all, you did this report, I think, last year, and this is your second year. So you've got some comparative. There is a heavy focus on the fact that you believe, and I say you, Growth 99 and the data show that this is that we're at a bit of an inflection point. There seems to be some differentiation between what's happening now and what's happened in the past. What is that inflection point? What do you see that's different right now, and what's going on?
Yeah, a couple of quick things. If anyone wants to get a copy of the report, they can just go to our website, growth99.com, go to our resources section.
We'll put a link to it for sure.
Yeah, there is. Our whole point in doing this is to share information around what's happening, and we really approach this as a complement to a lot of the research that your organization does, by the way. So, we tried to find some white space to lean into and what we were exploring, in addition to the data that you've been publishing for years. I think what really jumped out, and again, everyone talks about this, so it's not totally a surprise, but we didn't see it in the prior year's data, is this kind of divide between the practices that are really thriving and increasingly those that are barely surviving or struggling to survive. Absolutely came across in the data. And I think the way we've talked about it with our clients is we've seen this transition from a kind of an industry that's regarded as a growth industry. And we all know that, and I'll talk more about that. I don't think that's changed. What's changed is it's really a competitive growth industry now. And I think I remember from your benchmarking survey last year, 17% of the respondents were new starts in the last year. It was in that vicinity. That's absolutely incredible, right? Like, you see that amount of new starts every year. And so at some point, just opening your doors up in a growth business isn't going to be a growth strategy that works anymore, right? And it worked for a long time, like, let's be real. And I think what the data highlighted is that play is absolutely not going to enable success, period. And so those practices, and we'll talk, we can talk a lot about best practices that, understood that and, got out ahead of that change, seem to be pulling away from those that are, a little bit kind of in a deer in the headlight right now to some extent, and wondering like what happened despite all of the, commentary around the fact that this was coming.
Yeah, it's interesting, and let's kind of jump to that, because I found this very interesting too, and I appreciated the comparison to our data. Our data, we're actually coming out with a new report this year, so we hope to have that out relatively soon. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what it says. You had information on kind of the growth of the industry and how much things were like, the number of practices and what they were making and how much they were spending. And it was a little different from ours, which I think was interesting, but I also don't think it was necessarily surprising, because we're at a different part of the industry. And let me see if I'm trying to find what it is here, and I just had it and now I have lost it. But it was in the total amount of practices that were making, between 1 million and above. And what we saw was, here it is, the number of practices that were making under 500,000 a year was a lot, right? So that number of practices that is kind of opening their doors, but is not doing kind of as well as what our data was showing. The average practice was making, I think almost $1.5 million a year.
Yeah.
Which I think you rightfully pointed out probably was due to some of the upper end being offset by some of the very large practice groups that are kind of skewing the averages a little bit. What we're seeing, though, is there seems to be a bit of a gap between the haves and the have-nots. And I don't want to say have-nots because they're not have-nots, but opening your doors, there's a big group of practices that are kind of in that $100,000 to $500,000, $600,000 a year, and then you've got this cohort that is, maybe over 2 million that is growing. And it's not so easy to get from that 0 to 2 million, maybe as it was before, which indicates, I think, to your point, a lot more competition. There's perhaps consolidation. But the other thing that jumped out at me from that, and I'd love your comments on this, there still is a ton of these smaller practices. There's so many smaller practices that are under that $1 million range. And I think sometimes we forget about how big this industry is for that cohort, that it really is still a very small business driven industry.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a couple things. I think, first of all, if I recall the data correctly, your data and ours, roughly 80% of practices are still single location. I think that's remarkable. And I would assume if you go back 3 or 4 years, if you were talking about the trajectory of the business, you wouldn't have guessed that the kind of that level of consolidation would be that low at this point in time. So so it's interesting. You have this long tail of smaller practices, as you've said, and then on the other end of the spectrum, I think there's been a lot of money thrown at trying to figure out how to do roll-ups and create, multi-unit brands that are successful. And there's probably a lot fewer stories there of success than anyone would have expected, again, a few years ago. So that dynamic, I think the dynamic on, kind of both ends of the spectrum is really interesting. And we've definitely seen, when we talk about the divide, maybe we talk about like who's got to the other side of the divide and why. And then we can kind of come back to the smaller practices. It's really a lot of like almost common sense things. And I think, when I've talked at industry events, I always talk to the attendees around the fact that they all came into almost all of them came into traditional healthcare. You're never trained on business or marketing. You're in an environment typically like where I came out of as well, where I built a tech business where the demand is reluctant. You're in captive networks. You're not paying for the services. The interaction is transactional, and into this world where it's the opposite of all of those things. Back to the recurring revenue side, people are looking for relationships. They're spending their own money. They have a lot of choice, and the practices that we're seeing really pulling away. At the most fundamental level, they're great at delivering healthcare services, basically. And then what's interesting about aesthetics, there's definitely an art element on top of that, right? So like not everyone has that same level of artistry, which is important. And, we should talk a lot about differentiation. But the third piece is the most successful practices are embracing their role as entrepreneurs and business people, right? Mm-hmm. And that's just as important as the other two. And I think there's a reputation of, physicians and dentists and other providers that, quote unquote, not being good at business. In most of healthcare, you can still build an amazing business and career and get away with not being good at business. Absolutely not the case in the aesthetics world, right? And so, that's where that divide is really happening. It's the people that are taking that seriously, have the right mindset. They want to be great business people, not just great at delivering, aesthetic services. And that little difference, I think, is causing that divide. And that long tail of smaller practices, there's certainly going to be a number of them that are embracing what it takes to be successful, and they'll bridge the gap. I also think there's too many that are going to really struggle, because as the more successful practices kind of lean into what allows them to compete and win, they're going to continue to grow and gain share. And we've seen definitely a trend towards organic multi-location creation, where entrepreneurs, instead of roll-ups, are adding that second site, the third site, the fourth site. And I think that's a really interesting trend under a brand that's known and trusted in a geographic area. So that, I think there's very different things happening on kind of the opposite ends of the industry. And, the divide, I think, is, again, between those that are really focused on that business orientation on top of the other two, and taking it seriously, and really trying to become amazing businesses in addition to, amazing, clinicians.
Yeah, I feel like we just got back from the Medical Spa show a couple of weeks ago, and that was, I think, one of the big trends and takeaways is that really is driving a lot of what people are focused on now. Is that you absolutely have to be focused on that. And there's a couple of things that I think come up. One is obviously the actual tactics and strategy, which we'll get to. Another thing is just spend. You talk about kind of the gap in spending from folks that tend to look like they're spending more on marketing, and those who seem to be spending less. And I'm curious if there's number one, is there, we always say, there's between 5 and 10% spend on marketing. Do you have kind of a rule of thumb for what folks should be spending on marketing? And then are you seeing any correlation between like how the businesses that are thriving, like how much they are actually spending on marketing as a percentage of their revenue? Like, how do we go out and figure that out so we can give folks some actual benchmarks?
Yeah, no, great question. One of the most interesting data points was there was a 67% uptick in those practices spending higher than $5,000 a month, and that obviously goes up from there. We kind of just pick that number simply because 52% reported spending under $2,500 a month, and that was kind of like more of the norm, where you're kind of looking at it as a cost and trying to minimize it, quite frankly. And then we saw, again, I think those practices on the other side of the divide, recognizing that when done right, this is an investment, and they're spending a lot more behind that investment. There was also a jump up in those practices oriented on measuring their marketing spend around ROI, which seems obvious, but it wasn't typical before. And so I think that's another part of like who's going to have good long-term success versus not, because if you're able to effectively spend your marketing dollars, see the ROI, invest more in it, it creates basically a cycle that's very difficult to compete against if you're not in that category. I think we get asked that question a lot, like what's the right level to spend? And there's definitely benchmarks within the range that you highlighted. I think we often try to consult with our practices to really, lean into how they're performing. And there's some different things that we encourage them to look at. Number one, utilization is a really interesting, aspect of the industry. I think your data showed that, on average, practices are maybe using 55 or 60% of their capacity. If you think about room capacity, equipment providers, we also see in the data that half of their expenses are fixed costs. So when half of your expenses are fixed costs, that next dollar that comes in the door, the contribution margin dollar, is going to be very substantial, right? So it's maybe 65, 70% is basically your contribution margin to your business. So if you have that capacity, you have that high contribution margin, then you need to look at whether you're getting the right type of patients. Are they, in that $500-$600 range? Are they, committing to long-term treatment plans? Are they returning? If the answers to all these questions are yes, you should be carving out as much as you can afford to invest in marketing, because back to what we talked about before, kind of that recurring revenue orientation of the business, there's going to be a massive return on every patient that you acquire. And so, in those cases, I think you could easily justify spending double digits on your marketing. Obviously, you have to spend that marketing dollar wisely. But if you're seeing the return on it and you're spending maybe $250, $300 to acquire a patient, that patient's staying with you for years, they're spending $500 or $600 every time they come in, I'd invest in that all day long, right? And then, on the other side though, like if your practice capacity is really, you're fully booked up, maybe you're doing that with highly promotional, lower margin, lower dollar value services, patients aren't returning, it's not really a marketing investment issue. It's really, practice positioning, who you're going after, really rethinking your model before you, decide to put a lot of money behind it, because you could spend a lot in that scenario and actually be losing money on every dollar. So there's I think when you really get into some of the metrics kind of that are important to understand behind the question of marketing spend, you start to get at that, that level. And I think, kind of that low, medium, high level of investment just depends on where your practice is at that point in time. And is marketing spend really the issue or the answer? And, sometimes it is. A lot of times it's more fundamental marketing questions that you need to take care of. Yeah.
Yeah. Or just not even marketing questions, right? It's operational efficiency questions. I love that. I always gravitate towards that when I'm looking at my own business or others. And your report, and it's clear that you're big on this as well. Oftentimes, marketing spend is not a function of marketing spend; it's a function of business operations and efficiencies. And are you measuring? And because it's not, all the things that you just said begs the question: are you measuring all of the things you need to measure, and are you making, you call it handoff in your report, are you converting from one stage to the next? Do you have the right the right systems in place that are getting the patient from one conversion to the next conversion? Are all of those things happening? Because if they're not, you could spend all the marketing you want in the world and it's not going to make a difference.
Yeah, the other, just building on this, there's a couple things that we see, in our interaction with, with the practices that we serve today that I think are relevant to this issue. And we kind of, there's two major practice challenges that we see where we kind of drop in the middle of them, and maybe I can touch on each of them. I think it's relevant. The first one, the most important aspect of marketing and the marketing strategy, and I would say, I think it's almost fair to say that most practices don't get this right, is really understanding the market they're in, deciding who they're going to target, and deciding how they're going to be different and how they're going after those segments, right? Like that's marketing, literally that's marketing 101, like the first chapter of any marketing book. segment target position. And again, I would say most practices don't do that. In our data, 86% reported offering the same services, 77% said they are struggling with differentiating themselves. And yet, I don't think they're likely taking any action to actually differentiate themselves, right? And like that, it's going to be very difficult to get in that winner category if you're not going into the market with a strong sense of who you want to serve and why, and that you actually have something real in terms of your ability to, be unique relative to that customer segment or segments versus the other guys, right?
And Rob, I totally agree with you, and I actually say this all the time to people. One of the questions I get, and one of the questions I was asking myself as I was getting ready for this is, how do you define or figure out how to differentiate yourself when we're all basically offering the same treatments? I mean, and we all have, on some level, the same patient populations to be dealing with, right? So that's always my question is, I think it's a great point. How do you do that? How do you figure out what?
I think it's great. Great question. It's in the context of who you can serve, right? I'll give you probably not a great example, but it'll be one I can speak to personally. I live in Utah, in a suburb of Salt Lake called Holiday. There's 20 med spas that will show up under Google Business Profile if I search for a med spa on Holiday, that all have 4.9 or 5 stars. If you go to them, they're, to your point, they all have basically the same services. They have, for the most part, beautiful websites, good marketing. They talk about themselves the same way. And yet none of them, and I've looked at this, I actually spoke about this at our session at AmSpa, have any content whatsoever around men. And, again, not making the argument right now that that's the very best segment. I suspect, though, if one of them decided to build a practice, part of their practice around serving men in Holiday, and they, spoke to what I might be looking for, the experience that I want, looking for different type of content when I'm interacting with all of their marketing channels. If men are 15, 20, 25% of the market, and you can get 80% of that, you're going to be crushing every other med spa in the space, all else equal, right? And that's a simple example, but now go to young working moms, stay-at-home moms, empty nesters, pick your vertical or segment, and that same story exists. And so you're right, the product and the services are similar. How they're being positioned, how they're defining that experience, their expertise in specifically addressing a demographic, those all are very different. And I think, when we look at the practices that seem to do, best in the ones that we serve, they definitely have conviction around who they're going after and why. And I think they're very intentional in making sure that they're able to deliver to those patients in a way that's meaningfully different to those patients. And I think that's in some ways it's as simple as that, but it's also, I think probably really hard for people to grasp because most of them aren't doing it, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, and the other question I have gotten is, they don't want to only be one thing to one set of the population. They can they do multiple things, but you can have multiple marketing messages. But I think to your point is that you really want you want to do one thing really, really well. You have to hang your hat on something, and you can't be everything to everybody, right?
I mean, that the essence of the way I think about strategy is it's about making trade-off decisions. It's that simple. In any business. I mean, your business is the same way. You can't do everything. You can't serve everyone. You have to pick who you want to go after and why. And if you're doing that and most others aren't, you're going to have your unfair share advantage in that segment. And typically that's going to mean you're going to have a lot more share than, I want to, spread my message around a lot of different segments type of approach. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really hard, especially, and I found this at the beginning when a provider You mentioned providers that build their location and then organically grow into multiple locations. Oftentimes when they're doing that, they're getting a lot of referral based businesses. I've seen a lot of these providers who are just naturally good at it. They grow very quickly at first and they're doing kind of everything and they haven't focused. They have to then make a decision at some point. I'm going to focus. And it's tough. It's tough to do that. But if you're going to get from, point C to point E, you can't be everything to everybody. It's just, there's not enough, you don't have enough bandwidth yourself to do it.
No, I think the other thing that maybe is important on this one, when you focus, you're going to get a higher, if you execute well, you're going to get a much higher share of those segments that you're specifically going after. The reality is you're still going to get your even share of the rest. So it's not, there's a trade-off and a focus. There's still an element where, you're not turning away business, right? And, I think that's important as well. I would also say it's not simply in who you're targeting, but if you think about, right, like training your, front desk staff on how to recognize your most valuable patients, your injectors, your whole team, that makes a big difference as well, right? Like, and you know them when they walk in the door, you know who to give that extra level of, focus and attention to. Those individuals feel that, right? Back to this recurring revenue side of the business. We talk a lot about marketing, but the reality is if you could, build a pretty full base of bookings and have everyone come back 100% of the time, you would have solved your marketing problem, right? That's still the best marketing strategy. And, and a lot of that, again, comes back to who you're going after and why, and then doing that really, really well. Again and again and again, we see that. And I think to your point, though, about growth over time, with success, your capabilities at targeting multiple segments only grows. So, you may build your early success on a couple really focused segments. And as time goes on, you're extending that out. One of our best practices, I saw an Instagram post from her the other day where she was highlighting that they have patients from all 50 states through medical tourism.
Mm-hmm.
I found that super interesting. Like, she didn't start there, but as she's really built her practice out and extended it and got really good in certain areas, like her reach has actually gone national, which is super interesting. Right. So over time, this, your segmentation strategy and differentiation strategy absolutely evolve with the business as well.
So let's get into a little bit of AI and some of the different tech platforms, because this industry lives on Instagram, and it was interesting that I think your data reinforced that. I mean, most of the group that you were polling relies primarily on Instagram. There's obviously Facebook is a little bit. TikTok was a minor group. I was curious about that. Are you seeing TikTok as an emerging kind of platform? Because I remember back in the day, I think it was like Shelby Miller, who's from Utah, and this was maybe 10 years ago. She was, or maybe not that long. She was, I'd make $1 million off conversions from Instagram. And I was just like, what are you talking about? And then it was that kind of, you could see the correlation between Instagram, aesthetics, conversions, and dollars. Are you seeing that with TikTok also? Are we going to have that kind of an impact, or is Instagram still going to remain kind of the king for aesthetics?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things. I can bridge a little bit into the AI piece of this as well. I think, quite frankly, the whole question of what the right marketing channels are, including social channels, comes back to segments again. And Instagram absolutely reigns supreme in terms of social channels. I have no doubt, though, that there's, practices focused on a younger demographic, probably more urban, where they're seeing a ton of success with TikTok. I would say generically, based on, again, the generic profile of a med spa patient, that explains that lower percentage. But again, I guarantee you, there's practice owners that are spending most of their time engaging with TikTok, content. The other interesting thing, just because you brought Shelby up, and she's masterful at leveraging social media for her practice. She actually mentioned to us that AI has had a kind of this interesting indirect effect because it allowed everyone to develop much more professional content faster. And they actually shifted their strategy to almost go the opposite direction, just more personal, more fast, more point in time. And I don't know if you've seen that with her feed, but I saw this noticeable difference. And I mean, she's just, absolutely brilliant at kind of like reading the tea leaves and how things are changing and changing ahead of them. That's a big part of her success in a lot of aspects of her business. But even something as simple as the format of how she's leveraging Insta changed because of AI, but she almost went analog, I guess I would say, because AI was like closing the gap between what she had done and what everyone else could do. So she's gone back to a very different, more personal, a little bit more raw approach, I would say. And it's just like, I wouldn't have expected that at all. I would have expected like the bar keeps getting higher and everyone's trying to do the same thing, and she just takes a right turn. And I think that's worked really well for her, because she was seeing engagement actually fall off because people were getting numb to like the high production value stuff that became just the norm. So super interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of going along with that, what's what are like table stakes for using AI now? Like for practices that are wanting to either get into it or are doing it minimally, like what's your advice for, okay, you got to at least be doing X, Y, Z, or
Yeah, I mean, you probably saw in the data. I was actually shocked at this, that about half of practices reported using AI. I didn't think it would be that high. We're sitting here in May. When we did the survey, like 5 or 6 months ago, like that's dog years now in terms of AI adoption. But I think when we were doing the survey, I would have guessed it was maybe 25% or something, but it was 50. If you looked at where they were using it, it was, a lot of it was around content writing, writing copy, engaging with social. We coach practices when we talk about, segment, target, position. AI is brilliant for that as a starting point. Like a year ago, I actually spoke at AmSpa, and I was talking about the importance of understanding your market, segmenting it, picking segments. And someone asked, like, how do I do that? And it was a really hard question to answer for a small business, right? Not at all hard anymore. Like you kind of lean into AI and you get amazing local level data, and it will guide you to where the opportunities are just based on like the demographics in your region and your competitive set. And also will evaluate, what it can, derive around your own marketing, around, what you're really focused on and where there may be maps. So I think that type of like consultative side of AI is enormous. And there's a, giant industry of consultants in this business, and a lot of what they do, I'm not saying it replaces them, but it certainly can supplement that expertise, and it's right there for the taking, and it's absolutely incredible. So I think that's an obvious area. We recently launched an AI agent within our software platform. So again, we sell kind of an integrated growth platform that combines websites, automation software, AI, and services. So we're kind of hybrid technology and services. And so we launched a virtual agent that will today it's all digital engagement versus voice. That's by design. We just feel like voice isn't really where it needs to be for most med spas today, but it'll immediately and very effectively engage with any sort of demand. It could be a DM, an Instagram, filling out a form, a text message from your website, a chat, and it's pretty incredible. Like I'm just in awe of its capabilities. We trained it based on the top 10,000 chat interactions we had through our clients with our traditional chat bot. and then we'll train it based on each individual practice's unique content, their website, their own internal documentation. And the reason we're so excited about it isn't because it's AI. It's because when I was talking earlier about like where we fit in, the challenges we see, the strategic challenge is what we've already talked at length about. The tactical challenge, which is absolutely amazing, is how poor most med spas are at engaging with their demand. Right. It's absolutely incredible. I always say, like, do you like burning $100 bills? Because that's effectively what they're doing. And you've probably seen all the studies, a lead, if a lead isn't engaged in the first 5 or 10 minutes, its value plummets, and it's almost worthless after 4 or 5 hours. So, being able to leverage technology to, at least be part of that engagement strategy, I think is going to, it's early, it's going to make a huge difference. And the med spas that are adopting that and, building that into their process, I think are going to see huge returns in that area. And I think I think if you look across the entire, kind of the value creation side of a practice, back to your question, AI is going to, play a role everywhere is the answer. I think what's changing now is it's being built into tool sets versus, standalone. And I think that's where things are heading. And, we're obviously doing that, EHR providers, your booking system, your inventory management, those are all places I think AI can make a huge difference for successful, management of a med spa. And super exciting, right? Because I think it's like, again, for small businesses to be able to access technology at the same rate that a Fortune 500 company can, or maybe even faster, quite frankly, it is a pretty cool, situation to be facing.
Yeah, I agree. I think in many ways, smaller companies are going to be at an advantage because they're not going to have to deal with all the processes and red tape to go through. They can move. So, what are you most excited about with your product, with Growth 99? I love all the agents, the way that you're being able to respond to leads. I think that's amazing. What gets you most excited about kind of the next?
Yeah, we're I kind of alluded to our goals coming into this business, kind of looking at my time horizon within it and really trying to crack this really challenging value proposition on, how do you do all the things I described, right? Build and host and maintain and, optimize for SEO and for AI search and have a marketing automation software and AI and deliver all of that for $700, right? Like that, again, and we're totally committed to doing that. But there's a lot of moving parts in terms of our ability to pull that together. So the other thing we're doing is we're leveraging AI really to continue to strengthen our own back office. And, and I think there's a lot of, misconceptions around how AI can or should be utilized, but for us, it's going to allow us to do, more things faster for less cost at higher quality than we can do with people alone. And, we're absolutely still focused on kind of, human in the loop. So it isn't turning anything over to AI exclusively, but it's, supplementing, deep domain expertise with technology in a way to deliver, a marketing solution that's going to be even more functional, for our clients. And I think when I came into the business, obviously like, AI was developing, but I couldn't totally connect the dots on, how do we solve our own scaling challenge as a business? And I think that it's clear, like that's the way to solve that scaling challenge for us now. And, at the end of the day, being able to provide something of even more value and ultimately, so much value that our clients are, thanking us, if you will, for helping enable some aspect of their success. Like that's what we're excited about. And that's what we're aiming for sure.
Yeah. That's cool. Exciting stuff. Rob Pickell with Growth 99. study. We'll provide a link to the study and Growth 99. Remind me where folks can find more information about your product. I know they'll be interested in it.
Just go to our website, growth99.com. Tons of information there. I loved the conversation today, Alex. I really appreciate our time together.
I could talk, all day about this stuff. So I have a whole list of more questions. So, but we'll get to them next time. But no, I really appreciate your time. This is interesting stuff, and I can't wait to see what the future brings. We'll have to have you back in a little bit and see how things are going.
Sounds great. I'd welcome the opportunity.
All right. Thank you, Rob. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you to our producer, Madeline Moeller, Marketing Content Coordinator, who organizes the podcast schedule and guests and provides topics and talking points. Audio and video editing, voiceover, graphics, and platform management is provided by myself, Derek Hawk, Digital Marketing Supervisor. Our themes are provided by Maka Music. Thank you for watching or listening to the Medical Spa Insider podcast. Please follow or subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for future episodes. Ratings and reviews are greatly appreciated. For more information about the American Med Spa Association, visit americanmedspa.org. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by AmSpa. Views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance in the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity that they represent. AmSpa provides this podcast as a local service for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues. And as always, thank you for listening to the Medical Spa Insider. Remember, compliance is cool.